I came in a little late just when you were talking about classical influences and interests. I just wondered if you've ever worked with Richard Stoltzman, whom I guess has a very broad range of interest in his clarinet work.
No, I never worked with him.
Would somebody like him be willing, you think, to get involved in jazz and work with?
And he's tried to play some jazz. I've heard that. I remember he had a group with Miroslav, and he was trying to play some jazz. I mean, I never felt like he particularly embraced the harmonic challenges of the music. You know, coming from classical music, it's really difficult to look at jazz on the clarinet, because the clarinet is the first crossover instrument. You know, you could say the piano is a crossover instrument, but what Benny Goodman did in the 40s, that was an affront to the clarinet pedagogy. It really was. And American clarinet really changed in revolt of that. Like, American clarinet was like hard reeds, no vibrato. You know, that's all anti-Goodman sentiment. The British don't play like that. The French don't even play like that. So, you know, especially in my era when I was coming up, it was hard for like people that were actually in the classical field to really put down their prejudices about it, you know. I mean, you know, I remember clarinet teachers would say, you know, yeah, if you play clarinet, jazz clarinet, you had no sound, or you didn't have one. You know, I don't know if you heard that, but I heard it, and still hear people say things like that. That, you know, somebody outside of classical music doesn't have sound, doesn't have technique, can't read, and so like there's all the, you know, for somebody that's coming from that side of things, there's all those things in the back of your mind. But if you play certain instruments, like, you know, on the bass, you would never think that. Or as a brass player, you would never think that. Because there's always been cooperation between jazz and classical brass players. But I think on the woodwind instruments, there's still a lot of prejudice. And the high strings. The low string, you know, bass players were always the hippy-dippy section of the orchestra. There's always a few of them that were playing something subversive. But I think on the woodwind instruments, especially post Benny Goodman, there was definitely, you know, stay away from there. You know, when I was in high school, I couldn't even tell my clarinet teacher that I had a saxophone. I couldn't tell her. You know what's really interesting is that there's a famous composer named Olivier Messiaen who wrote all this stuff about birds and stuff like that. You know, like Lalo Schifrin was one of his students. But he had to lie and say that he wasn't playing with Dizzy. Couldn't tell him anything. He would have dropped him. You know, so people don't want to actually know that about classical music, that there is this kind of feeling of anti-jazz, and that it would result in somebody having to hide that they were playing jazz at the highest level from their own teacher. But you know, that's the way it was. I don't know if it's that way now because I'm not in school. You know, this is after Winton and after I don't know who else. But, you know, when I was in school, I think it was quite like that.